The wind howled through the empty sanctuary as Marcus Zimmerman pushed open the heavy wooden doors of his small chapel on the outskirts of Wood River, Montana territory, finding a woman on her knees before the altar, her blonde hair cascading down her back as she whispered desperate prayers into the silence of his most sacred place. Marcus stood frozen in the doorway, his weathered boots caked with dust from the long ride back from town, and he felt his breath catch in his throat at the sight of this stranger seeking solace in the chapel he had built with his own hands 3 years ago. She wore a simple gray dress torn at the hem, and her shoulders shook with quiet sobs that echoed through the wooden beams overhead. He had come here seeking his own answers, his own moment of peace after another lonely day working his cattle ranch, and instead, he found himself witnessing someone else's private moment with God. He cleared his throat gently, not wanting to startle her but needing to announce his presence. The woman's head snapped up, and when she turned to face him, Marcus saw eyes the color of spring grass, red-rimmed from crying, widened in fear. She scrambled to her feet, her hands clasping together nervously. "I am so sorry," she said, her voice hoarse and trembling. "I did not mean to trespass. I saw the chapel from the road and I just needed somewhere to pray. I will leave right away." Marcus held up a hand, stepping fully into the chapel and letting the door swing shut behind him. The late afternoon sun streamed through the simple glass windows, casting golden light across the worn wooden pews he had carved himself during the long winter months. "No need to apologize, miss. This chapel is open to anyone who needs it. That is why I built it." She studied him cautiously, her gaze taking in his tall frame, the sun-darkened skin of his face, the dust covering his clothes. Marcus knew he probably looked rough after a full day of mending fences and checking on his herd, but he tried to keep his expression gentle, understanding. At 29 years old, he had spent enough time alone to recognize someone else who was hurting. "Are you the owner of this place?" she asked, her voice still uncertain. "I suppose you could say that. Built it myself about 3 years back. My ranch is just over that ridge." He gestured vaguely toward the west. "Name is Marcus Zimmerman. Most folks around here just call me Marcus." She hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "Grace Kellerman, I am grateful for your kindness in not turning me away. Where are you coming from, Miss Kellerman?" "Wood River is the nearest town, and that is still 5 miles east of here. This chapel sits pretty much in the middle of nowhere." Grace's eyes dropped to the floor, and Marcus watched as she wrapped her arms around herself protectively. "I was traveling with a wagon train heading to Oregon. We stopped in Wood River 2 days ago for supplies. I got separated from the group when I went for a walk yesterday evening. When I tried to find my way back, I only got more lost. I have been walking since dawn trying to find the main road." Marcus felt a pang of concern. The Montana territory could be unforgiving to those who did not know the land. "You have been out here alone all night," she nodded, and he saw her chin tremble despite her obvious effort to remain composed. "I found a small overhang of rocks where I waited until morning. I prayed that God would guide me to safety, and then I saw your chapel. I know it might sound foolish, but it felt like an answer." Something stirred in Marcus's chest, an emotion he had not allowed himself to feel in a very long time. For 3 years, he had been praying in this very chapel for purpose, for meaning, for someone to share the life he had built. He had watched other men in Wood River find wives, start families, while he remained alone with his cattle and his prayers. His own parents had died during his journey west when he was 20, leaving him with nothing but the money they had saved and the dream they had all shared of building something lasting. "Well, Miss Kellerman, I would say your prayers were answered, but we need to get you some food and water. You look like you are about to collapse." Grace's hand went to her throat, and Marcus noticed how pale she looked, how her dress hung loose on her frame. "I do not want to impose. If you could just point me toward Wood River, I am sure I can manage. In your condition. The sun will be setting in a few hours, and you would never make it before dark. Besides, there is no guarantee your wagon train is still there. Most groups only stop for a day at most before moving on." Marcus moved toward the altar, where he kept a small basket with some basic supplies. He pulled out a canteen of water and offered it to her. "Please drink. Then we will get you to my ranch house, get you properly fed, and figure out what to do next." Grace accepted the canteen with trembling hands, and Marcus watched as she drank deeply, some of the color returning to her cheeks. When she lowered the container, she met his eyes again, and he saw a mixture of gratitude and lingering fear there. "Why are you being so kind to me? You do not know anything about me." Marcus considered the question seriously. "I suppose because if someone I cared about was lost and alone, I would hope a stranger would show them the same kindness. And because this chapel represents something important to me. It is a place of faith and hope. Seems fitting that it brought someone here who needed both." The words seemed to ease something in Grace's posture. She handed the canteen back to him, her fingers brushing his briefly, and Marcus felt an unexpected jolt of warmth at the contact. Up close, he could see the delicate features of her face, the way her blonde hair caught the sunlight, the determination in her eyes despite her obvious exhaustion. "Thank you, Marcus. I accept your help, though I hope to repay your kindness somehow." He smiled at her, the expression feeling strange on his face after so many days of solitude. "No repayment needed. Come on, my horse is tied up outside. The ranch is only about a mile from here." Marcus led Grace outside, where his bay gelding, Copper, waited patiently by the hitching post. The chapel sat in a small clearing surrounded by ponderosa pines and rocky outcroppings, with mountains rising in the distance. It was beautiful country, harsh but honest, and Marcus had grown to love every inch of it. He untied Copper and turned to Grace. "You are in no condition to walk. We will ride double." Before she could protest, he swung up into the saddle and extended his hand down to her. Grace looked at his hand for a long moment before placing her smaller one in his grip. Marcus pulled her up behind him, and she settled onto Copper's back, her arms tentatively wrapping around his waist for balance. The contact sent another jolt through Marcus, and he realized with surprise that this was the first time in 3 years he had been this close to a woman. He urged Copper into a gentle walk, mindful of his passenger, and they headed toward the ridge that overlooked his property. "How did you end up out here by yourself?" Grace asked quietly, her voice close to his ear. "Building a chapel seems like an unusual project for a cattleman." Marcus guided Copper around a rocky patch, considering how much to share. "My parents and I came west together in 1882. We had plans to start a ranch, build a community. My father was a preacher back in Ohio, and he always talked about building a church wherever we settled. They died of fever that first winter, before we even made it to Montana territory. I was 20 years old and suddenly alone." He felt Grace's arms tighten slightly around his waist, a gesture of sympathy that warmed him despite the sad memories. "I used the money they had saved to buy land and start the ranch," Marcus continued. "Spent years just surviving, building the business. But 3 years ago, I realized I had everything my parents had wanted for me except the church. So I built the chapel in their honor. I figured it might help me feel closer to them, closer to God, give me some purpose beyond just existing day to day." "That is beautiful," Grace said softly. "I am sorry about your parents. That must have been incredibly difficult." "It was, still is sometimes. But working the land, building something with my own hands, it helps." He paused as they crested the ridge and his ranch spread out before them in the valley below. There it is, home. The ranch consisted of a sturdy log house with a covered porch, a large barn, several outbuildings, and fenced pastures where his cattle grazed. It was not fancy, but Marcus had built every structure himself, and he felt a surge of pride showing it to Grace. "You built all of this yourself?" she asked, wonder evident in her voice. "Most of it. Had some help with the barn raising from neighbors, but the house and other buildings I managed on my own. Took a long time, but I like to think it turned out well. It is remarkable. You should be proud." They rode down into the valley, and Marcus felt an unfamiliar sense of nervousness building in his chest. He rarely had visitors, and never a woman alone. He would need to be proper, respectable, even though his intentions were purely to help someone in need. The last thing he wanted was for Grace to feel unsafe or for anyone to think poorly of her situation. As they approached the house, Marcus's dog, a border collie named Scout, came bounding across the yard, barking excitedly. Grace tensed behind him and Marcus called out, "Scout, easy, friend." The dog immediately calmed, his tail wagging as he circled Copper curiously. Marcus dismounted and then helped Grace down, his hands spanning her waist as he lifted her to the ground. She swayed slightly, and he kept his hands steady until she regained her balance. "Sorry, I should have warned you about Scout. He is harmless, just enthusiastic." Grace reached down to pet the dog, who immediately pressed against her leg seeking attention. She smiled, the first genuine smile Marcus had seen from her, and it transformed her face completely. He found himself staring, caught off guard by how beautiful she looked when the fear and exhaustion lifted from her features. "I love dogs," she said, scratching Scout behind the ears. "We had 3 back home in Illinois before my parents decided to head west." Marcus led Copper to the barn with Grace and Scout following. "Your family is with the wagon train," Grace's smile faded. "No. My parents died last year during the first attempt to cross the plains. Cholera. I went back to stay with my aunt in Illinois, but she passed this spring. I had no other family, nothing keeping me there, so I joined another wagon train heading to Oregon. I had hoped to start fresh, maybe find work as a school teacher." Marcus felt his chest tighten with sympathy. "I am sorry. It seems we have both lost more than our share." "Perhaps that is why God led me to your chapel," Grace said quietly. "Maybe we were meant to understand each other." He looked at her over Copper's back as he removed the saddle, and their eyes met in the dim light of the barn. Something passed between them, an understanding, a recognition of shared pain and shared survival. Marcus felt that stirring in his chest again, stronger this time, and he realized with sudden clarity that finding Grace in his chapel might indeed have been an answer to his prayers, though not in any way he could have imagined. After settling Copper in his stall with fresh hay and water, Marcus led Grace to the house. The interior was simple but clean, with a main room that served as kitchen and living area, a bedroom off to one side, and a small loft accessible by a ladder. He had built sturdy furniture and everything had a place, the neat organization of a man living alone. "Please, sit down," Marcus said, gesturing to one of the chairs at his kitchen table. "I will get some food together. I have stew from last night that I can heat up and fresh bread from town." Grace sank into the chair gratefully, and Marcus noticed how she looked around the room with open curiosity. He felt oddly self-conscious as he moved about his kitchen, stoking the fire in the stove and setting a pot of stew to warm. He sliced bread and poured water from the pitcher into clean glasses, aware of Grace's eyes following his movements. "You keep a very tidy home," she observed. "That is unusual for a bachelor." Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. My mother insisted that cleanliness was next to godliness. Some habits stick with you. She raised you well. As the stew warmed, filling the house with savory aromas, Marcus sat down across from Grace. In the better light, he could see more details about her. She was probably around 22 or 23, he guessed, with fine features and those striking green eyes. Despite the dirt on her dress and the exhaustion evident in her face, there was a strength to her, a determination that spoke of resilience. "Tell me about your journey," he said. "You mentioned this was your second attempt to reach Oregon." Grace wrapped her hands around the water glass, staring into its contents. "The first time was with my parents. We left Illinois in spring of 1884, full of hope and plans. My father wanted to claim land, start farming. My mother just wanted adventure, something new. I was excited too, though scared. Then the cholera came through the wagon train somewhere in Nebraska. They died within days of each other. I was 21 and suddenly an orphan." Her voice remained steady, but Marcus saw the pain in her eyes, the grief that still lingered. He recognized it because he saw the same look in his own reflection sometimes. "The wagon master arranged for me to return with a supply wagon heading back east," Grace continued. "I lived with my aunt in Chicago for a year, worked as a seamstress. But after she died this past March, I realized I had nothing left there. All the memories were in Illinois anyway, not Chicago. I decided to finish what my parents started, to make it to Oregon for them." "That takes courage," Marcus said sincerely. "Or foolishness," Grace replied with a sad smile. "And now I am separated from that wagon train too. I seem to have terrible luck with these journeys." Marcus stood to check the stew, stirring it slowly. "I would say finding your way to help is actually rather good luck. Things could have turned out much worse." "You are right. I am grateful, truly." He ladled stew into 2 bowls and brought them to the table with the sliced bread. Grace accepted hers with thanks, and they ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. Marcus watched as the food seemed to revive her, color returning fully to her cheeks, her movements becoming less shaky. "This is delicious," Grace said. "You are a good cook." "Another skill learned from my mother. She insisted that everyone should know how to feed themselves properly." Marcus took a drink of water. "We should talk about what happens next. I can ride into Wood River tomorrow and ask around about the wagon train you were with. If they are still there, we can get you back to them. If they have moved on, we can figure out another solution." Grace set down her spoon, her expression troubled. "I have been thinking about that. Even if they are still there, I am not sure I want to rejoin them. Why not?" She was quiet for a moment, seeming to gather her thoughts. "The wagon master, a man named Carl Brennan, he was not a good man. He made inappropriate advances toward me several times during the journey. I kept refusing him, which made him angry. That walk I took when I got lost, I took it because he had cornered me earlier that day, saying that if I wanted his protection on the trail, I needed to be more friendly. I needed space to think, to pray about what to do. That is when I wandered too far and got turned around." Marcus felt anger surge through him, hot and protective. "Did he hurt you?" "No, not physically. But his intentions were clear. Several other women on the train warned me about him. Apparently his wife died 2 years ago, and since then he has been looking for a replacement. I just did not realize he would fixate on me." Grace met Marcus's eyes, her own reflecting worry and determination. "I do not want to put myself back in that situation. I would rather face the unknown than deal with Carl Brennan for another month on the trail." Marcus nodded slowly, understanding her position completely. "Then you will not go back. We will find another way." "But what other way is there? I have no money, no family, nowhere to go. Oregon was my plan, but I cannot get there alone." You could stay here, Marcus said, the words coming out before he had fully thought them through. But once they were spoken, he realized he meant them. I mean, temporarily, until we figure out a proper plan. The ranch is isolated and people might talk, but I give you my word that you would be safe and respected here. Grace stared at him, surprise evident on her face. You would do that? Let a complete stranger stay in your home? You are not a complete stranger. You are someone in need, and I have the means to help. Besides, he added with a small smile, you were praying in my chapel. That gives you some credentials. She laughed, a real laugh that lit up her face and made Marcus's heart do an unexpected flip in his chest. That is an interesting way of looking at it. I know it is not an ideal situation, Marcus continued, wanting to be honest with her, and we would need to be careful about propriety. But there is a lot of work to be done on a ranch, and if you wanted to earn your keep, I am sure we could find tasks that need doing. You mentioned being a seamstress. I have clothing that needs mending, and the house could use a woman's touch in organization and such. It would be a fair arrangement, not charity. Grace considered this, her green eyes studying him carefully. You truly are a good man, Marcus Zimmerman. I think your parents would be very proud of who you became. The words touched something deep inside Marcus, a place he usually kept locked away. I try to live in a way that would honor them. So, is that a yes? You will stay at least for a while. Yes, Grace said softly. If you are sure it is not too much trouble, I would be grateful to stay and help however I can. Marcus felt something settle inside him, a rightness he had not experienced in years. Good, that is settled then. You can have my bedroom and I will sleep in the loft. I cannot take your bed. The loft is fine for me. The ladder is steep and you are exhausted. I insist. We can sort out more permanent arrangements later, but for tonight, you need proper rest. He stood and carried their empty bowls to the wash basin. There is a washroom out back with a basin and pump if you want to clean up. I have some clothes that might work for you, at least until we can get your dress properly cleaned or make something more suitable. Grace rose from the table, swaying slightly. Marcus moved quickly to steady her, his hand on her elbow. Easy. You have been through an ordeal. She looked up at him, and they stood close for a moment. Marcus acutely aware of her presence, the faint scent of lavender that clung to her hair despite her rough journey. He saw something flicker in her eyes, an awareness that mirrored his own, before she stepped back carefully. Thank you, Marcus, for everything. I know I keep saying it, but I truly mean it. You saved my life today. You saved your own life by not giving up, by keeping faith. I just provided a roof and a meal. He moved toward his bedroom, giving her space. Let me get you those clothes and some blankets. Over the next hour, Marcus helped Grace get settled. He provided her with one of his shirts and a pair of pants that could be cinched with rope, along with clean cloths and soap for washing. While she cleaned up in the washroom, he changed the sheets on his bed and made sure she had everything she needed. He carried his own blankets up to the loft, creating a makeshift sleeping space among the stored goods and supplies he kept up there. When Grace emerged from the washroom wearing his oversized clothes, her hair damp and hanging loose around her shoulders, Marcus felt his breath catch again. There was something intimate about seeing her in his clothing, in his space, that made the house suddenly feel less empty and more like a home. Much better, she said, smiling at him, though I look rather ridiculous in these. You look fine, Marcus said, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. He cleared his throat. You should get some rest. Tomorrow we can go through my mother's old trunk. She was about your size and I kept some of her clothes. You are welcome to anything that fits. Grace's eyes went soft. You kept your mother's clothes. I kept a lot of their things. Could not bring myself to get rid of them. Maybe this is why, so they could be useful to someone who needs them. I would be honored to wear them if you are sure. I am sure. They stood in the main room, the evening light fading outside the windows, and Marcus felt the weight of the day settling over both of them. There was so much uncertainty ahead, so many questions about what would happen next. But in this moment, with Grace standing in his home wearing his clothes, with Scout curled up by the fire and the familiar sounds of his ranch surrounding them, Marcus felt something he had not felt in 3 long years. He felt hope. "Good night, Grace," he said softly. "Good night, Marcus. And thank you again." She disappeared into the bedroom, closing the door gently behind her. Marcus stood alone in the main room for a long moment, listening to the quiet sounds of her moving around, settling in. Then he climbed the ladder to the loft, Scout following him up, and lay down on his makeshift bed. Through the floorboards, he could hear the soft sounds of Grace's breathing as she settled into sleep. He stared up at the ceiling in the darkness, his mind spinning with the events of the day. This morning he had been alone, praying for purpose and meaning. Tonight, a woman was sleeping in his bed, someone who needed his help, someone who had appeared in his chapel like an answer to prayers he had barely known how to voice. Marcus thought about the way Grace had looked at him during dinner, the way she had laughed, the strength he saw in her despite everything she had endured. He thought about the feeling in his chest when he looked at her, something warm and alive that he had thought died when his parents passed. It was too soon for such feelings, he told himself. She was vulnerable, displaced, in need of help. He had to be careful, proper, respectful. But even as he thought this, Marcus could not deny the truth settling into his bones. Grace Kellerman had appeared in his chapel today, and somehow, someway, his life had just changed completely. He fell asleep with a prayer of gratitude on his lips, thanking God for guiding Grace to safety and asking for wisdom in the days ahead. Outside, the Montana night settled over the ranch, stars spreading across the sky like diamonds, and the wind whispered through the pines carrying promises of tomorrow. Marcus woke at dawn as usual, his body trained by years of ranch work to rise with the sun. For a moment he was disoriented by his surroundings in the loft, then memory flooded back and he sat up quickly, listening. The house was silent except for Scout's gentle snoring beside him. He climbed down the ladder quietly, not wanting to wake Grace, and went about his morning routine. He stoked the fire, put coffee on to boil, and stepped outside to begin the first chores of the day. The early morning air was crisp and clean, and Marcus breathed deeply as he walked to the barn. Feeding the horses and checking on the cattle took about an hour. When he returned to the house, the smell of cooking food greeted him, and he found Grace standing at his stove, working with practiced efficiency. She had found his mother's trunk and dressed in a simple blue calico dress that fit her remarkably well. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a neat braid, and she looked rested and more herself than she had the evening before. "Good morning," she said, turning to smile at him. "I hope you do not mind. I found the eggs and thought I would make breakfast." "Mind, I am impressed." Most guests would not immediately start working. "I told you I wanted to earn my keep. Besides, cooking for 2 is much nicer than cooking for 1. She gestured to the table, where she had laid out plates and cups. "Coffee is ready and the eggs will be done in just a moment." Marcus poured them both coffee and sat down, watching her work. Grace moved comfortably in his kitchen, and seeing her there felt natural, right. She served up scrambled eggs with the last of the bread from yesterday, and they sat down to eat together. "I thought we could ride into Wood River today," Marcus said between bites. "I need to pick up supplies anyway, and we can ask around about your wagon train. Even if you do not want to rejoin them, we should find out if they have moved on." Grace nodded, her expression thoughtful. "That makes sense. I should probably let them know I am alive, at least. Some of the women on the train were kind to me. They will be worried. We can also talk to Reverend Thomas. He and his wife run the church in town. Good people. They might have ideas about your situation, maybe know of families looking for help or teachers needed in the area. You have given this a lot of thought. Marcus met her eyes across the table. I want to make sure you have options, Grace. I meant what I said last night about you staying here, but I also know you need to build your own life, make your own choices. Whatever help I can provide to make that happen, I will. You really are remarkable, Grace said softly. I have met very few men in my life who would be so concerned with a stranger's welfare without expecting something in return. Marcus felt heat rise in his face. I expect nothing except maybe some company and help around the place. Fair trade as I see it. After breakfast, they cleaned up together and prepared for the ride to town. Marcus saddled Copper and also brought out his mare, Willow, who he used for lighter riding. Grace proved to be a competent rider, sitting Willow with easy grace as they set out across the range toward Wood River. The ride took about an hour, and they talked easily as they went. Grace asked questions about the ranch, about raising cattle, about life in Montana Territory. Marcus found himself telling her things he had not spoken about in years, memories of his parents, stories about building the chapel, his hopes for the future. I always thought I would have a family by now, he admitted as they followed the trail through a stand of pines. But between building the ranch and the isolation out here, I never seemed to meet the right person. Most of the women in Wood River are already married, and the few single ones have their pick of younger, more charming men. Grace looked over at him, her green eyes thoughtful. I doubt that is true. Any woman would be lucky to have someone as dependable and kind as you. Maybe, or maybe I have just been too focused on work to notice opportunities. He paused, then added, What about you? Surely you had suitors back in Illinois. A shadow crossed Grace's face. There was someone, before my parents decided to head west. Thomas Bennett. We had an understanding, talked about marriage, but when I told him about my parents' plans, he got angry. Said I had to choose between him and my family. I could not abandon my parents and he would not come with us. So that was the end of it. His loss, Marcus said firmly. Grace smiled at him. That is kind of you to say. They crested a hill and Wood River came into view below them. The town was small but growing, with a main street lined with wooden buildings, houses spreading out beyond, and the church steeple visible against the blue sky. Wagons and horses moved along the street, and Marcus could see people going about their business. It is a nice town, Grace observed. Bigger than I expected for being so remote. It has grown a lot in the 5 years I have been here. The railroad is supposed to come through in the next year or two, which will bring even more people. Marcus guided Copper down the trail toward town. Come on, we will stop at the general store first. The owner, Samuel Perkins, knows everything that happens in this town. They rode down the main street, and Marcus was aware of the curious looks directed their way. It was rare for him to come to town with someone, especially a woman, and he knew tongues would wag. But he kept his head high and his expression neutral, leading Grace to the hitching post in front of Perkins' general store. Inside, Samuel Perkins stood behind the counter, helping a customer. He was a portly man in his 50s with a friendly face and sharp eyes that took in everything. When he saw Marcus enter with Grace, his eyebrows rose with interest. Marcus Zimmerman, twice in 1 week. That must be a record, Samuel said jovially once his customer had left. Then his gaze shifted to Grace, openly curious. And who is this lovely lady? Samuel, this is Miss Grace Kellerman. Grace, Samuel Perkins, owner of this fine establishment and the biggest gossip in Wood River. Samuel laughed good-naturedly. Guilty as charged. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Kellerman. What brings you to our town?" Grace glanced at Marcus, who gave her an encouraging nod. She explained about the wagon train getting lost, finding the chapel. Samuel listened intently, his expression growing concerned. "The Brennan wagon train left yesterday morning," Samuel said when she finished. "Caused quite a stir when they pulled out. Apparently, one of their party had gone missing, a young woman, and Brennan insisted they could not wait any longer. Some of the other travelers were mighty upset about it, but Brennan was the wagon master." Grace's face paled slightly, and Marcus moved closer to her instinctively. "So they left her behind?" he asked, anger evident in his voice. "Seems that way." Brennan claimed she probably ran off, said she had been trouble the whole trip. A few of the women defended her, said she was a good person and they were worried sick, but Brennan would not budge. Samuel looked at Grace with sympathy. "I am guessing you are the missing woman." "Yes," Grace said quietly. "Though I did not run off, I got lost." "Well, you are safe now, thank the Lord. That Brennan fellow did not sit right with me anyway. Too much bluster and not enough compassion." Samuel turned to Marcus. "What are your plans?" "Grace is going to stay at my ranch for a while, help me out with some things in exchange for room and board until she figures out her next steps." Samuel's eyebrows rose again, but he nodded approvingly. "That is mighty Christian of you, Marcus. Though I imagine some folks might have things to say about a single man and woman living under the same roof." "I am sleeping in the loft," Marcus said firmly. "Everything is proper and respectable, and anyone who wants to question my honor or Miss Kellerman's is welcome to do so to my face." The steel in Marcus's voice made Samuel hold up his hands in a placating gesture. "No judgment from me, son. I think it is a fine thing you are doing, but you know how small towns can be. Which is why we are here talking to you first," Marcus said, his tone softening. "You know everyone, Samuel. If word spreads from you that everything is above board, people will accept it." Samuel considered this, then nodded slowly. "You have always been a man of integrity, Marcus. I will make sure people understand the situation." He looked at Grace with kindness. "And if anyone gives you trouble, Miss Kellerman, you come straight to me or my wife. We will set them straight." "Thank you, Mr. Perkins," Grace said gratefully. "Your support means a great deal." They spent a few more minutes in the store while Marcus gathered the supplies he needed. Other customers came and went, and Marcus made a point of introducing Grace to each one, explaining the situation simply and directly. Most people were friendly and welcoming, offering their sympathies about the wagon train and their support for the arrangement. As they were leaving, Samuel called out, "Marcus, one more thing. You might want to stop by the church. Reverend Thomas was asking after you just yesterday, said he had not seen you in a few weeks." "We will head there next," Marcus replied. "Thanks, Samuel." Outside, Grace let out a long breath. "That was nerve-wracking. Do you think people believed us?" "I think most people will give us the benefit of the doubt. And honestly, we are not doing anything wrong. You need help, I can provide it. Simple as that." They walked their horses down the street to the white-painted church at the edge of town. It was a modest building with a tall steeple and a neat yard. The Reverend's house sat next door, and as they approached, an older woman emerged from the front door, wiping her hands on her apron. "Marcus Zimmerman," she called out warmly. "What a wonderful surprise." "Hello, Mrs. Thomas," Marcus said, smiling at the Reverend's wife. She was a plump woman in her 60s with gray hair and kind eyes. "Is the Reverend available?" "He is in the church, preparing Sunday's sermon. But come inside first and have some lemonade, and introduce me to your friend." They followed Mrs. Thomas into the house, where she served them cool lemonade and listened to their story with growing sympathy. Her husband, Reverend Thomas, joined them after a few minutes, a tall man with white hair and a gentle demeanor. "This is quite a situation," the Reverend said after hearing everything. "But I think Marcus has offered you a good solution, Miss Kellerman. And I want you both to know that you have the church's full support." "Some folks might talk," Mrs. Thomas added, "but they talk about everything. You just keep your heads high and live according to your values. That is all anyone can ask." "Actually," Reverend Thomas said thoughtfully, "this might be a good opportunity to discuss something I have been meaning to bring up with you, Marcus. The church has been growing and we have been thinking about starting a school. We need a teacher. Miss Kellerman, you mentioned wanting to teach. Would that be something of interest?" Grace's face lit up. "Very much so. I worked as a teacher's assistant back in Illinois and have always wanted my own classroom. The pay would not be much," the Reverend warned, "but it would give you an income and a purpose here in Wood River." "I would love to be considered for the position," Grace said eagerly. Marcus felt a surge of hope and something else, something more selfish. If Grace had a job in Wood River, she would have a reason to stay in the area. She could build a life here, which meant she would not be leaving for Oregon or anywhere else. The thought of her staying, of having her nearby, filled him with a warmth that had nothing to do with the lemonade. They spent another hour with the Thomases, discussing the school idea and the logistics of making it work. By the time they left, Grace had been officially offered the position, with classes set to start in 6 weeks once they could build the schoolhouse and gather students. "This is amazing," Grace said as they rode back toward the ranch, her face glowing with excitement. "I came here lost and desperate, and now I have a place to live and a job. It feels like a miracle." "Montana Territory has a way of surprising people," Marcus said, unable to stop smiling at her happiness. "I am glad things are working out." "It is all because of you," Grace said, reaching over to touch his arm briefly. "You gave me a chance when you could have just sent me on my way." "I will never forget that." Marcus felt the touch of her hand like a brand, warm and significant. "You would have done the same for someone else. Maybe, but not everyone would." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. Marcus found himself imagining the future, something he had not done in a long time. Grace living at the ranch, working in town as a teacher, sharing meals with him, filling his house with her presence. It was a dangerous line of thinking for someone who had only known her for a day, but Marcus could not seem to stop himself. The days that followed fell into a natural rhythm. Marcus went about his ranch work while Grace tackled the inside of the house, mending clothes, organizing, cleaning, cooking meals that made the place smell like a home. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and talk as the sun set over the mountains, Scout lying at their feet. Marcus found himself hurrying through his chores each day, eager to get back to the house, to Grace. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their pasts, discussing their hopes for the future, debating philosophy and faith and what made life meaningful. One evening, about a week after Grace had arrived, they sat on the porch as usual, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Grace had been quiet during dinner, seeming preoccupied, and Marcus finally asked if something was wrong. "Not wrong exactly," Grace said slowly. "I have just been thinking about how much my life has changed in such a short time. A week ago, I was terrified and lost. Now I feel safe and hopeful. It is almost too good to be true." "Why does that trouble you?" "Because I keep waiting for something to go wrong. In my experience, when things are going well, that is when disaster strikes." She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "My parents dying, my aunt dying, Thomas leaving me, the wagon train abandoning me. I have lost so much, Marcus. I am afraid to trust that this happiness might last." Marcus understood that fear intimately. He had felt it after his parents died, the sense that anything good would inevitably be taken away. But sitting here with Grace, he realized something important. "I think maybe we are looking at it wrong," he said carefully. "Yes, we have both lost people we loved, but we survived. We kept going. We built new lives from the ashes of the old ones. That takes strength, Grace. Maybe instead of waiting for disaster, we should celebrate the fact that we are still here, still capable of finding joy." Grace turned to look at him, her green eyes reflecting the lamplight from inside the house. "You really believe that?" "I am starting to. You know what I was praying for when I found you in the chapel?" She shook her head. "I was praying for purpose, for meaning, for someone to share this life with. I have been so lonely, Grace, even though I did not fully realize it until you arrived. Building this ranch, the chapel, all of it felt empty because I was doing it alone. But this past week, having you here, it has reminded me what I was building toward. A home, not just a house. A life, not just an existence." "Marcus," Grace said softly, and he saw tears shimmering in her eyes. "I know it has only been a week," he continued, his heart pounding. "And I know you probably need time to figure out your own life before thinking about anything else. But I want you to know that having you here has meant more to me than I can properly express. You have brought light back into this place, into my life. And I find myself hoping, praying even, that you might choose to stay not just for a while but permanently." Grace was silent for a long moment, and Marcus felt fear grip his chest. He had said too much, moved too fast. But then she reached across the small space between their chairs and took his hand, her fingers threading through his. "I have been feeling the same way," she admitted. "I kept telling myself it was too soon, that I was just grateful for your help. But it is more than that, Marcus. When I look at you, when we talk, when we share meals or sit here in the evenings, I feel something I have never felt before, not even with Thomas, something deeper and truer." Marcus squeezed her hand, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I think maybe we were both praying for the same thing without realizing it. I think maybe God led me to your chapel not just to save my life, but to give us both a chance at the life we were meant to have. Together." The word hung in the air between them, full of promise and possibility. Marcus stood, pulling Grace gently to her feet, and they stood facing each other on the porch. The night air was cool and clear, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled, but Marcus was only aware of Grace, of her hand in his, of the way she looked at him with hope and trust, and something that might be love. "I care about you, Grace Kellerman," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "More than I thought possible in such a short time. I want to court you properly, do this right. I want to give you time to be sure." "I am sure," Grace said, stepping closer. "I have never been more sure of anything." Marcus raised his free hand to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. "Then I am the luckiest man in Montana territory." He leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, but Grace rose on her toes to meet him halfway. Their lips met in a gentle kiss, tender and full of promise. It was Marcus's first kiss in more years than he cared to count, and it felt like coming home, like every prayer he had ever whispered in his chapel had led to this moment. When they pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Grace laughed softly. "Well, that was worth waiting for." Marcus grinned, feeling happier than he could remember. "I hope there will be many more where that came from. I think that can be arranged." They sat back down, but this time Marcus pulled his chair close to Grace's so they could sit with her hand in his, fingers intertwined. They stayed there for hours, talking and planning and dreaming about the future, while the stars wheeled overhead and the night deepened around them. Over the next weeks, Marcus courted Grace with all the romance and respect she deserved. He picked wildflowers for her when he was out checking the cattle, left them on the kitchen table for her to find. He took her on rides through the most beautiful parts of his property, showing her hidden valleys and clear streams. They attended church in Wood River together, sitting side by side in the pew, and weathered the curious looks and whispered speculation with good humor. The schoolhouse construction began, and Marcus volunteered his labor, working alongside other men from town to build a sturdy structure where Grace would teach. Watching her excitement grow as the building took shape filled him with pride and affection. One Sunday after church, Marcus asked Grace to ride with him to the chapel. They had not been back there since the day he found her, and he felt it was time to return to the place where their story began. The chapel looked just as it had that afternoon, peaceful and solid among the pines. They tied their horses and walked inside together, hand in hand. Grace moved to the altar where she had been praying that day, and Marcus stood behind her, his hands resting gently on her shoulders. "I have been thinking about that day," Grace said softly. "About the prayers I was saying when you found me. What were you praying for? Safety, obviously. Guidance. But also for someone to help me, someone I could trust. I was so tired of being alone, Marcus. So tired of feeling like I had to face everything by myself. I prayed for God to send me someone who would see me, really see me and care." Marcus turned her around to face him, his hands moving to hold hers. "And I was praying for the exact same thing. For someone to share my life with, someone who would understand what I was trying to build here." "We found each other," Grace said, smiling up at him. "In this little chapel in the middle of nowhere, we found exactly what we needed. Grace, I have something I want to ask you." Marcus reached into his pocket, pulling out a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother. He had cleaned and polished it the night before, remembering how his father had placed it on his mother's finger on their wedding day. "This was my mother's ring. My father gave it to her when they married, and she wore it every day until she died. I have been carrying it with me, waiting for the right moment, the right person." Grace's eyes went wide, filling with tears as Marcus knelt before her in the chapel. "Grace Kellerman, I know we have only known each other for a short time by conventional standards. But I feel like I have known you forever, like my soul recognized yours the moment I saw you praying here. You have brought joy and purpose back into my life. You have made my house a home and given me reason to believe in the future again. I love you, Grace. I love your strength and your kindness and your faith. I love the way you laugh and the way you look at the world. I love everything about you. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears streamed down Grace's face as she nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Finally, she managed to say, "Yes, Marcus. Yes, I will marry you. I love you too, so much it scares me sometimes. But it is a good fear, the kind that means something real and important is happening." Marcus slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, as if it had been meant for her all along. He stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her deeply while the afternoon sun streamed through the chapel windows, bathing them in golden light. "When?" Grace asked when they finally pulled apart. "When should we marry?" "As soon as possible," Marcus said. "I have waited 29 years to find you, Grace. I do not want to wait any longer than necessary to make you my wife." "Neither do I." They decided on a month, which would give Grace time to finish preparing for the school opening and allow them to make proper arrangements. Word of their engagement spread quickly through Wood River, and while a few busybodies clucked their tongues about the speed of the courtship, most people were genuinely happy for them. Mrs. Thomas took Grace under her wing, helping her prepare for the wedding and teaching her the ways of running a ranch household. Samuel Perkins donated fabric for a wedding dress, which Grace sewed herself with help from several women in town who had befriended her. Marcus threw himself into improving the ranch, wanting everything perfect for, when Grace officially became his wife. He added a room onto the house for a future nursery, expanded the garden, and built proper furniture for their bedroom. Every hammer blow, every board placed, felt like an act of love and hope. The night before their wedding, Marcus stood on his porch alone, looking out at the land he had worked so hard to build. Tomorrow, he would stand before God and the community and promise himself to Grace forever. Tomorrow, his life would truly begin. He thought about his parents, wishing desperately that they could be here to see this day. But in his heart, Marcus felt their presence, their approval. They had dreamed of him building a life in the West, and he had done it. More than that, he had found someone to share it with, someone who understood him completely. "Thank you," Marcus whispered into the night, not sure if he was talking to his parents or God or both. "Thank you for guiding her to me. I promise to love her and honor her every day of my life." The wedding took place on a brilliant September afternoon in 1885, with the chapel packed full of people from Wood River and the surrounding ranches. Grace looked beautiful in her simple white dress, her blonde hair crowned with wildflowers Marcus had picked that morning. Reverend Thomas performed the ceremony, his voice strong and sure as he spoke about love and commitment and faith. When Marcus saw Grace walking toward him on Samuel Perkins' arm, his throat tightened with emotion. She was radiant, smiling at him with such love and trust that he felt unworthy of it. But then she was beside him, taking his hand, and the Reverend was leading them through their vows. "I, Marcus Zimmerman, take you, Grace Kellerman, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the emotion coursing through him. "I promise to love you, honor you, protect you, and cherish you for all the days of my life. You are the answer to my prayers, and I will spend every day showing you how grateful I am that God led you to me." Grace's voice was strong and clear as she said her own vows. "I, Grace Kellerman, take you, Marcus Zimmerman, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, support you, stand beside you, and build a life with you full of faith and joy. You saved me in every way a person can be saved, and I will love you forever for it." When Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, Marcus kissed Grace with all the love in his heart, and the chapel erupted in cheers and applause. They walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, greeting their friends and neighbors, accepting congratulations and well wishes. The celebration continued at the ranch, where tables had been set up in the yard and neighbors had contributed food for a feast. There was music and dancing and laughter, and as the sun set, Marcus danced with his wife under the stars while their friends looked on approvingly. "Happy?" Marcus asked, holding Grace close as they swayed to the music. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Grace replied, resting her head against his chest. "This morning I woke up as Grace Kellerman, alone in the world. Tonight, I am Grace Zimmerman, with a husband who loves me and a community that has welcomed me. It feels like a dream. If it is a dream, I never want to wake up." Later, after the guests had departed and they were finally alone, Marcus carried Grace over the threshold of their home. He set her down gently in their bedroom where lamplight cast a warm glow over everything. "Are you nervous?" Marcus asked, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "A little," Grace admitted. "But mostly I am just happy. I love you, Marcus. I love our life. I love everything about this." "I love you too, more than words can say." They came together that night with tenderness and passion, learning each other, becoming truly one. Marcus had waited his whole life for this for her, and it was even more beautiful than he had dreamed. Holding Grace in his arms afterward, feeling her breathing slow as she drifted to sleep, Marcus felt complete in a way he never had before. The months that followed were filled with joy and hard work. Grace opened the school in October, teaching 15 children from Wood River and the surrounding ranches. She proved to be a natural teacher, patient and creative, and the children adored her. Marcus would ride into town sometimes just to watch her through the schoolhouse window, marveling at how she had found her calling. At home, they worked side by side on the ranch. Grace proved surprisingly capable with the animals and the land, learning quickly and never shying away from hard work. They made improvements to the property together, planning and dreaming about the future. Winter came, bringing deep snow and long nights. Marcus and Grace would sit by the fire after dinner, reading aloud to each other, talking, making love in their warm bed while the wind howled outside. It was during one of these cozy evenings in late January that Grace told Marcus she was expecting a child. He stared at her for a long moment, the book he had been reading forgotten in his hands. "Truly?" Grace nodded, tears of joy streaming down her face. "I wanted to be sure before I told you." "But yes, Marcus, we are going to have a baby. In early summer, the doctor thinks." Marcus set aside the book and pulled Grace into his arms, holding her close as emotion overwhelmed him. A baby. His and Grace's child. The family he had dreamed of but never truly believed would be his. "I cannot believe it," he whispered into her hair. "Grace, you have given me everything. A home, a purpose, and now a child. How did I get so lucky?" "We are both lucky," Grace said, pulling back to look at him. "We found each other when we both needed it most. We built this life together. And now we get to bring a new life into it. I am so happy, Marcus. So very happy." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, with Grace continuing to teach until April when the school year ended. She had already arranged with Reverend Thomas to hire a substitute teacher for the next year while she cared for the baby, with plans to return when the child was older. As Grace's belly grew, Marcus found himself becoming increasingly protective and attentive. He insisted she rest more, worried constantly about her health, drove her to distraction with his hovering. But Grace tolerated his concern with good humor, understanding that it came from love. In early June of 1886, on a warm evening when the ranch was bathed in golden sunlight, Grace went into labor. Marcus rode as fast as he dared to fetch the doctor and Mrs. Thomas, then paced the house anxiously while the women attended to Grace. The labor lasted through the night and into the next morning. Marcus wore a path in the wooden floor with his pacing, praying constantly for Grace's safety, for the baby's health. He had already lost so many people he loved. The thought of losing Grace was unbearable. Finally, just after dawn, he heard the thin wail of a newborn baby, and Mrs. Thomas emerged from the bedroom, her face wreathed in smiles. "You have a son, Marcus, a healthy, beautiful boy, and Grace is doing wonderfully." Marcus nearly collapsed with relief. "Can I see them?" "Of course." "Go meet your son." Marcus entered the bedroom to find Grace propped up against pillows, looking exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up as he approached, her smile lighting up the room. "Marcus, come meet our son." He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, peering down at the tiny face visible within the blankets. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was already trying to focus his eyes. Marcus reached out a tentative finger, and the baby's tiny hand wrapped around it, gripping with surprising strength. "He is perfect," Marcus whispered, awed by the tiny life they had created. "Grace, he is absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Grace asked. "I thought maybe we could honor your parents somehow." Marcus thought about this, emotion tightening his chest. "My father's name was Matthew. My mother's maiden name was Sawyer." "Matthew Sawyer Zimmerman," Grace said softly. "It is perfect. Hello, Matthew. Welcome to the world, little one." They sat together in the morning light, the three of them, and Marcus felt his heart swell with love so intense it was almost painful. This was his family. His wife, his son, his life. Everything he had worked for, prayed for, hoped for, all gathered in this room. "I love you," he told Grace, leaning over to kiss her forehead gently. "Thank you for him. Thank you for everything." "We are a family now," Grace said, tears of joy sliding down her cheeks. "The three of us together. It is everything I dreamed of and more." Matthew Sawyer Zimmerman proved to be a healthy, happy baby who filled the ranch house with new sounds and energy. Marcus discovered he loved being a father, changing diapers and walking the floor at night with his son, teaching the baby about the ranch even though Matthew was too young to understand. Grace recovered quickly from the birth and threw herself into motherhood with the same dedication she brought to everything else. She was a natural mother, patient and loving, and Marcus fell even more deeply in love with her watching her care for their son. The years that followed were full and rich. Grace returned to teaching when Matthew was old enough, taking him with her to the schoolhouse where he played quietly while she taught. Marcus continued building the ranch, expanding the herd, improving the land. They added onto the house again, preparing for more children. In 1888, Grace gave birth to their daughter, Sarah Grace Zimmerman, named after Marcus's mother Sarah. She had her mother's blonde hair and green eyes, and from birth she was a fierce, determined little thing who knew her own mind. 2 years later came another son, David, who was quieter and more thoughtful than his siblings. And in 1892, they welcomed their youngest, a daughter named Mary who completed their family. The ranch prospered as the children grew. The railroad came through Wood River as predicted, bringing new people and opportunities. The town grew into a small city, and Marcus's ranch became one of the most successful in the region. But success never changed who Marcus and Grace were at their core. They continued to attend church every Sunday, continued to open their chapel to anyone who needed it. They raised their children with the values of faith, hard work, and compassion. Matthew grew into a strong young man who loved the ranch and planned to take it over someday. Sarah became a teacher like her mother, passionate about education. David discovered a gift for working with horses and started a breeding program. Mary, the youngest, showed artistic talent and spent hours sketching the Montana landscape. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Marcus and Grace rode together to the chapel where their story had begun. The children were being watched by Mrs. Thomas, giving the couple a rare afternoon alone together. They sat in the same pew where Marcus had first seen Grace praying, holding hands and remembering. "You ever regret it?" Marcus asked. "Staying here instead of going to Oregon?" Grace looked at him with surprise and love. "Not for one single moment. Oregon was a dream my parents had, not mine. This life with you, our children, the ranch, the school, all of it is my dream. A dream I did not even know I had until I found you." "I think about that day so often," Marcus said. "How different my life would be if I had not decided to come to the chapel that afternoon. Or if you had not seen it from the road. So many little things that had to happen exactly right for us to find each other." "It was not chance," Grace said firmly. "It was God answering both our prayers. I was praying for someone to help me, and you were praying for someone to share your life with. We both got exactly what we needed, even if it looked different than we expected." Marcus pulled her close, kissing her with all the love of 10 years of marriage. "You are still the answer to my prayers, Grace Zimmerman, every single day, and you are mine." They sat in the chapel as the afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting the same golden light that had illuminated them the day they met. Outside, they could hear birds singing and the wind in the pines. The world continued on, but in this moment they were suspended in time, remembering and celebrating the miracle that had brought them together. The years continued to pass, bringing their share of challenges and changes. There were hard winters when they lost cattle, dry summers that tested their resources, the normal trials of raising children and running a ranch. But through it all, Marcus and Grace faced everything together, their love growing deeper and stronger with each passing year. They celebrated as their children grew and started their own lives. Matthew married a local girl, Emma Patterson, and took over day-to-day management of the ranch, building his own house on the property. Sarah married a teacher from Helena and continued her own teaching career. David started his horse breeding business, which quickly gained a reputation for quality throughout Montana. Mary went to art school in San Francisco but returned home often, never losing her connection to the ranch and the land she loved. Marcus and Grace became grandparents, delighting in the new generation of Zimmermans. They taught their grandchildren the same values they had instilled in their own children, passing down stories of faith and perseverance, and the day a lost woman found her way to a lonely cowboy's chapel. As they grew older, Marcus and Grace spent more time at the chapel, maintaining it carefully and ensuring it remained available to anyone who needed it. They added a small cemetery nearby, where Marcus's parents were symbolically remembered with markers, even though they were buried far away. It became a place of peace and reflection, a constant reminder of where their love story began. On their 25th wedding anniversary, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, Marcus and Grace renewed their vows in the chapel. Marcus was 54 now, his dark hair touched with silver, his face lined by years of sun and wind. Grace was 48, still beautiful, her blonde hair faded to a soft gold-silver, her green eyes as bright as ever. "I, Marcus Zimmerman, renew my vows to you, Grace Zimmerman," Marcus said, his voice strong despite his emotion. 25 years ago, I promised to love you all the days of my life. I have kept that promise and I renew it now. You are still the answer to my prayers, the love of my life, my everything. Grace smiled through her tears. I, Grace Zimmerman, renew my vows to you, Marcus Zimmerman. You saved me 25 years ago, not just from being lost in the wilderness, but from being lost in life. You gave me purpose, family, love beyond measure. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. Their children and grandchildren applauded as they kissed, and the celebration that followed was full of joy and laughter and love. That night, sitting on their porch as they had done countless times over the years, Marcus and Grace watched the stars emerge in the Montana sky. "We have had a good life," Marcus said, Grace's hand secure in his. "The best life," Grace agreed, "full of love and family and purpose." Everything we both prayed for that day in the chapel. "Do you remember how scared you were, how lost you felt?" Grace smiled. "I remember. And I remember how you looked when you opened the door like an answer to prayer standing there in the sunlight. I knew then, even though it seemed impossible, that my life was about to change. Mine too. I just did not fully realize it yet." Marcus squeezed her hand gently. "Thank you, Grace, for saying yes to staying, for building this life with me, for every day of the last 25 years. Thank you for being the kind of man worth saying yes to, for loving me so completely and raising our children with such devotion, for being my partner in everything." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the night deepen around them. The ranch was quiet except for the usual sounds of animals settling and the wind in the trees. Their son Matthew's house showed light in its windows across the property, and Marcus knew their grandchildren were probably being tucked into bed at this very moment. This was legacy, Marcus thought. Not just the land or the buildings or the financial success. The real legacy was love passed down through generations, values instilled in children who would instill them in their own children. It was the story of a lost woman and a lonely cowboy who found each other in a chapel and built something lasting together. As they grew even older, Marcus and Grace slowed down but never stopped. They remained active in the church, mentored younger couples, and spent as much time as possible with their growing family. More grandchildren came, filling the ranch with noise and laughter during visits. When Marcus was 63, he had a health scare that reminded them both of mortality. Grace nursed him back to health with fierce determination, refusing to let him give up during the difficult recovery. It was a reversal of their early days when he had cared for her, and Marcus was humbled by her devotion. "You are not leaving me yet, Marcus Zimmerman," Grace said firmly during his recovery. "We have too much living left to do." "Yes, madam," Marcus replied, smiling weakly at her commanding tone. "I would not dare disobey." He recovered fully, and they had several more good years together. They saw their youngest grandchild born, celebrated their children's successes, and mourned when Reverend Thomas passed away, knowing he was with God. On a warm summer evening in 1911, Marcus and Grace rode together to the chapel one more time. They were both showing their age now, Marcus at 70 and Grace at 63, but they still rode regularly and refused to let time slow them down more than necessary. The chapel looked much as it had on that first day, though weathered by 26 years of Montana seasons. Marcus had maintained it carefully, replacing boards as needed, keeping the interior clean and welcoming. It remained a place of peace and prayer, used occasionally by travelers or neighbors who needed a quiet moment with God. They sat in their usual pew, and Grace rested her head on Marcus's shoulder. "Do you think we will be together in heaven?" she asked quietly. Marcus kissed the top of her head. "I believe with all my heart that we will. God brought us together in this life. I cannot imagine He would separate us in the next. Good, because eternity without you sounds lonely. I feel the same way. You are my soulmate, Grace, in this life and whatever comes after." They sat in the chapel as evening fell, both lost in memory and gratitude. This place had witnessed the beginning of their love story, and it felt fitting to return here often to remember and give thanks. The years continued their steady march. Marcus and Grace celebrated their 40th anniversary in 1925, surrounded by 4 children, 15 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren. It was a massive celebration, with people traveling from all over Montana to honor the couple who had become pillars of the Wood River community. Marcus stood to speak, his voice still strong despite his 74 years. 40 years ago, I found a woman praying in my chapel. She was lost, scared, desperate for help. I had been praying too, though I did not realize it, for someone to share my life with. God answered both our prayers that day in ways we could never have imagined. Grace, you have given me the most wonderful 40 years a man could ask for. You have been my wife, my partner, my best friend, the mother of my children and grandmother to our grandchildren. You are the love of my life, and I thank God every day for leading you to me. Grace stood beside him, her eyes shining with tears and love. Marcus Zimmerman, you saved my life in every way possible. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You loved me when I had nothing and stood by me through everything. These 40 years have been a gift, and I cherish every moment we have spent together. You are my hero, my love, my everything. They kissed while their family applauded, and the celebration continued long into the night with music and dancing and stories. Marcus and Grace danced together as they had on their wedding night, moving slowly now but with the same love and devotion. When Marcus passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 79 in 1930, Grace was beside him, holding his hand. Their children gathered quickly, surrounding them with love and support. Marcus opened his eyes one last time, looked at Grace with all the love of 45 years of marriage and whispered, "Thank you for everything. I love you." "I love you too," Grace replied, tears streaming down her face. "I will see you again." Marcus smiled, squeezed her hand weakly, and closed his eyes for the final time. The doctor confirmed what Grace already knew in her heart. Her beloved husband, her answered prayer, was gone. The funeral was held in the chapel Marcus had built, packed with family and friends who had loved him. Grace stood strong through the service, though her heart was breaking. She spoke about their love story, about the day they met, about the life they had built together. "Marcus once told me that he thought God led me to his chapel as an answer to both our prayers," Grace said, her voice steady despite her grief. "He was right. We found each other when we both needed it most, and we built a life together full of faith, love, and family. I am heartbroken to lose him, but I am so grateful for every moment we shared. He made me a better person, and I hope I did the same for him. I know he is with God now at peace, and I take comfort in knowing I will see him again someday." Marcus was buried in the small cemetery beside the chapel, under a simple stone that read, "Marcus Zimmerman, 1851–1930, beloved husband, father, grandfather, and friend. Builder of this chapel, builder of a life well lived, Grace lived for another 8 years, surrounded by her loving family." She continued to visit the chapel regularly, sitting in their pew and talking to Marcus as if he were still beside her. She maintained the chapel carefully, ensuring it remained a testament to the faith and love that had defined their life together. She watched her grandchildren grow and marry, met more great-grandchildren, and spent her final years at peace, secure in the knowledge that she had lived a life full of purpose and love. She told the story of how she met Marcus to anyone who would listen, wanting the younger generations to understand the power of faith and the miracle of finding your soulmate. On a quiet spring morning in 1938, Grace passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 73. Her children found her with a smile on her face, as if she had seen something wonderful in her final moments. They buried her beside Marcus in the cemetery by the chapel, under a stone that read, "Grace Zimmerman, 1865–1938, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and friend." She found love in this chapel and shared it with the world. The chapel remained standing for generations, maintained by the Zimmerman family as a tribute to Marcus and Grace. It became a landmark in the area, and people would visit to hear the story of the cowboy who found a woman praying in his chapel, and how she became the answer to his own prayers. Their children carried on the values Marcus and Grace had instilled, passing them down to their own children and grandchildren. The ranch remained in the family, evolving with the times but never losing its connection to its founding legacy. Matthew's descendants continued to work the land, honoring the dream Marcus had built and the love story that had made it all possible. The story of Marcus and Grace became local legend, told and retold through the years. Young couples would visit the chapel, hoping some of that miraculous love would touch their own lives. The Wood River Historical Society documented their story, ensuring that future generations would know about the faith and perseverance that had built the community. In the end, Marcus and Grace's legacy was not just the land or the chapel, or even their large family, though all of those things were important. Their true legacy was the proof that prayers are answered, that faith can guide us through the darkest times, and that love found in the most unexpected moments can transform everything. They had both been lost in their own ways when they found each other in that chapel on a Montana afternoon in 1885. Marcus had been lonely, searching for purpose beyond mere survival. Grace had been literally and figuratively lost, desperate for help and direction. In finding each other, they had found themselves, their purpose, their reason for being. Their love story was simple in many ways, just two people who recognized in each other exactly what they needed and had the courage to build a life together. But it was also profound, a testament to the power of faith, hope, and opening your heart to the possibility of love even when it seems impossible. The chapel still stands today, weathered but strong, a monument to a cowboy and the woman he found praying there. And on quiet evenings when the wind whispers through the Montana pines, some say you can still feel the love that was born in that place, the prayers that were answered, and the miracle of two lonely souls finding exactly what they needed in each other. Marcus and Grace Zimmerman lived, loved, built a family and a legacy, and proved that sometimes the answer to our prayers comes in the most unexpected forms. Their story reminds us that it is never too late for love, that faith can guide us through anything, and that the most beautiful things in life often happen when we open our hearts to possibilities we never imagined. They rest together now in the cemetery by the chapel, side by side as they were in life, their love story complete and their prayers fully answered. And their descendants continue on, carrying the values and love that Marcus and Grace built their life upon, ensuring that the miracle that happened in that chapel in 1885 continues to touch lives more than a century later.